I worked at a big box store for almost 4 years. It was the kind of place that sold practically everything under one roof: groceries, televisions, furniture, gardening supplies, clothing, medicine, tools, and enough seasonal decorations to fill a warehouse. The building sat near a highway interchange at the edge of town. Behind it was a loading yard surrounded by a chain link fence, and beyond that were several acres of undeveloped land. During the day, the store was loud enough to become exhausting. Shopping carts rattled across the tile. Pallet jacks beeped in the back room. Children cried. People argued over returns. Employees were constantly being called to different departments. At night, it became a completely different place. Once the customers were gone and most of the ceiling lights had been switched off, the store felt much larger than it did during business hours. Entire departments disappeared into darkness. The security mirrors above the aisles reflected shapes you couldn't immediately identify. Refrigeration units hummed in the grocery section, and the metal building creaked whenever the temperature changed outside. I normally worked evenings, but once a year, the store conducted a full inventory count. For that week, several employees were scheduled overnight to prepare the sales floor before an outside inventory crew arrived. We had to straighten shelves, organize the stockroom, label unmarked merchandise, and make sure nothing was hidden behind displays. Most employees hated inventory week. I didn't mind it. There were no customers asking questions, no announcements about missing family members, and no lines forming at the registers. We were allowed to wear headphones in one ear while we worked, and management usually ordered food sometime around midnight. The first 2 nights were uneventful. On the third night, I was assigned to the seasonal department in the rear corner of the building. At the time, it was transitioning from outdoor furniture to holiday merchandise. Half the department was filled with patio chairs and box grills, while the other half had artificial trees stacked almost to the ceiling. The department bordered the garden center, which had been closed for the season. The garden center lights were off, and the glass doors leading outside had been chained from the inside. My job was to pull merchandise away from the walls and check for anything that had fallen behind the shelving. I had been working for about an hour when I noticed a strange smell. It wasn't overpowering. At first, I thought it was spoiled food someone had left behind a display. The smell was damp and sour, like wet clothes sealed inside a plastic container. I followed it to a row of metal shelving against the back wall. There was a narrow gap between 2 display racks. It wasn't wide enough for a shopping cart, but a person could squeeze through it sideways. I moved one of the shelves forward and shined my phone flashlight into the space. There were several crushed water bottles on the floor. Next to them was an empty package of crackers, 2 canned meals, and a folded piece of cardboard that looked like it had been used as a cushion. I assumed the mess had been left by an employee. People sometimes ate in the stockroom, even though we weren't supposed to, and the overnight crew had a reputation for hiding in forgotten corners during their breaks. I called the overnight supervisor and showed her what I found. She stared at the cardboard for a few seconds and then crouched down to look behind the shelving. "Probably one of the truck workers," she said. She sounded irritated but not concerned. She told me to throw everything away and continue working. As I picked up the water bottles, I noticed something else wedged beneath the lowest shelf. It was an employee badge. The front had been scraped so badly that the photograph and writing were unreadable. The plastic clip was missing, and the edges looked as though someone had chewed on them or repeatedly cut them with a tool. I handed it to the supervisor. She turned it over, looked at the damaged front, and slipped it into her pocket. "Old badge," she said. "Someone probably dropped it years ago." I asked why anyone would scratch the picture off. She shrugged. "People do weird things when they quit." She told me not to worry about it. I didn't, at least not then. The rest of the shift passed normally. The next night, I was assigned to the grocery aisles with another employee. He was older than me and had worked at the store for more than a decade. He knew every shortcut through the building and could identify most employees by the sound of their footsteps. Sometime after midnight, we were organizing canned goods when the store's overhead speaker made a clicking sound. The speakers normally played music during business hours. After closing, the overnight supervisor shut the system off. We both stopped working. A few seconds later, someone breathed into the microphone. It wasn't a word. It was just a slow exhale followed by a soft scraping noise. The employee beside me looked up toward the speaker. "Management office," he said. He sounded annoyed rather than frightened. We walked in front of the store and found the overnight supervisor inside the office with two other employees. She wasn't holding the paging microphone. When we asked whether she had used the speaker, she looked confused. She said the paging system was turned off. One of the employees suggested that someone had accidentally activated a phone extension. Several phones throughout the store could access the intercom by pressing a code. The supervisor checked the office phone and then called the service desk extension. No one answered. The service desk was empty. She made a quick announcement telling everyone to stop playing with the phones and return to their assignments. Nobody admitted doing it. About 20 minutes later, the speaker clicked again. This time, there was no breathing. We heard 3 knocks. They were slow and evenly spaced, as if someone was tapping the microphone against the table. Then the speaker went silent. The supervisor became angry. She walked through the store checking every phone station, while 2 employees searched the back room. They found nothing. The store had security cameras, but not every phone was visible. Several departments had blind spots, especially near the rear emergency exits and inside the older sections of the stockroom. Management eventually decided that the paging system was malfunctioning. Maintenance was supposed to inspect it the following morning. I went back to grocery and tried to ignore it. Around 2 in the morning, the employee working with me left to use the restroom. I continued organizing the shelf. A few minutes later, I heard wheels squeaking at the far end of the aisle. The sound stopped when I looked up. I couldn't see anything past the displays. I assumed another worker was pushing a cart through the main walkway. I returned to the shelf. The squeaking started again. It was closer this time. I stepped into the center of the aisle and looked toward the front of the store. A flat metal cart was parked across the entrance. Nobody was standing near it. The cart hadn't been there earlier. I walked toward it and looked into the surrounding aisles. There was no one around. One of the wheels was still slowly turning. I called out, thinking the other employee might be trying to scare me. He didn't respond. I pushed the cart out of my way and continued toward the restroom. The employee came out as I approached. I asked if he had moved the cart. He said he hadn't. He had gone directly to the restroom and hadn't seen anyone else. When we returned to the grocery aisle, the cart was gone. Neither of us had heard it being moved. We reported it to the supervisor. She sighed and said everyone was becoming jumpy because of the strange noises from the intercom. There were nearly 20 people working inside the building that night. Someone could have moved the cart without thinking about it. That explanation made sense. Still, I kept glancing toward the ends of the aisles for the rest of my shift. At 6 in the morning, the daytime employees began arriving and the store felt normal again. The next night was a final preparation shift before the outside inventory team arrived. More employees were scheduled than usual. Every department had to be finished before sunrise. I was assigned to the receiving area behind the stockroom. The receiving area was one of the oldest sections of the building. It had concrete floors, exposed pipes, and high metal racks filled with merchandise waiting to be stocked. Near the rear wall was a locked cage containing electronics and expensive tools. Beyond that were the compactor, loading doors, maintenance room, and a narrow hallway leading to the employee emergency exit. At around 11, the receiving clerk asked me to help move several damaged boxes. While we were working, he complained that merchandise had been disappearing from the damaged goods area. It wasn't anything valuable. Bottled water, canned food, blankets, flashlights, and packages of socks. He assumed employees were stealing the items, but the losses didn't make much sense. Anyone risking their job would normally take electronics, cosmetics, or other things that could be resold. Nobody understood why someone would steal dented food and damage bedding. I immediately thought about the cardboard behind the seasonal shelves. I asked how long the items had been disappearing. He said he had first noticed it several months earlier. The losses were small enough that management hadn't investigated them. Then he mentioned something that made me uncomfortable. The maintenance room key had also disappeared. The maintenance room contained cleaning equipment, replacement ceiling tiles, light bulbs, and tools used by the store's repair contractors. It also provided access to a utility ladder, leading to the space above the sales floor. The key had been missing for at least 2 weeks. The door could still be opened by management's master key, so no one had been in a hurry to replace the lock. I told him what I had found behind the shelving. He stopped moving boxes. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely concerned. He asked whether I had reported it. I said I had. He told me to show him the exact location. During our break, we went to the seasonal department shortly after midnight. The shelves had been returned to their original positions, leaving only the narrow gap. The receiving clerk used his flashlight to look behind them. The space was empty. Everything I had found had been thrown away. He started to step back, then noticed a dark mark on the wall. It was about shoulder height. At first, it looked like a smudge. When he leaned closer, we saw that it was an arrow drawn with black marker. It pointed upward. Above the shelving was a rectangular air vent. The vent cover was dusty, but one corner appeared cleaner than the rest. The receiving clerk brought over a small ladder. He climbed high enough to inspect the vent. 2 of the screws were missing. The remaining screws were loose enough to turn by hand. He pulled the cover outward slightly. A folded piece of cloth fell from inside the duct and landed on the floor. It was part of an old employee uniform. The store had changed uniform styles several years earlier. I had seen the older shirts in training videos, but I had never worn one myself. The fabric was stained and had been cut into a wide strip. There were small holes along both edges, as though someone had been using it as a strap. The receiving clerk climbed down and told me not to touch it. He called the overnight supervisor. When she arrived, she looked more irritated than alarmed. She said the vent was probably being used by mice or some other animal. The receiving clerk asked her what kind of animal carried employee uniforms into air ducts. She didn't answer. He insisted that she contact the store manager. The store manager wasn't scheduled until morning, but the receiving clerk said he would call the police himself if management refused to investigate. That changed her attitude. She locked the seasonal department and told everyone to stay away from the area. Then she contacted the store manager. The manager arrived less than an hour later. He brought the head of store security with him. They inspected the vent, photographed the cloth, and reviewed camera footage from the previous nights. Most of the cameras showed nothing unusual. The seasonal department camera was pointed toward the main aisle, not the shelving near the back wall. The grocery footage showed the metal cart blocking the aisle. It appeared at the edge of the camera view at 2:16 in the morning. Nobody was pushing it. The cart slowly rolled into the aisle and stopped. The security manager replayed the footage several times. There was a blind spot beside a promotional display. Someone could have pushed the car from that position and stepped back without being recorded. A few minutes later, the cart rolled out of the aisle again. Once again, the person moving it stayed outside the camera's view. The manager asked whether any employees had been dismissed recently. Several had quit, but nobody had been fired. They checked the exterior cameras. No unauthorized person had entered through the public doors, loading area, garden center, or emergency exits. That meant one of 2 things. Either an employee was playing an elaborate prank, or someone was already inside the building before the doors were locked. Management instructed us to continue working while security searched the store. Nobody liked that decision. The employees were gathered near the front and told to remain in pairs. Every restroom, office, fitting room, and storage area would be inspected. The maintenance room was open first. At a glance, it appeared normal. Cleaning supplies lined one wall. Replacement ceiling tiles were stacked near the back. A tall metal ladder led to a square opening in the ceiling. The opening should have been covered by a lock panel. The panel was hanging open. Security climbed the ladder and shined a flashlight into the space above. There was enough room between the ceiling and the roof for utility lines, ventilation equipment, and electrical wiring. Metal beams crossed the building in both directions. A thin layer of dust covered most of the surfaces. Near the opening, the dust had been disturbed. Someone had been moving through it. The security manager climbed higher until his shoulders disappeared above the ceiling. A few seconds later, he came down quickly. He told the store manager they needed to evacuate the building. When we asked what he had seen, he wouldn't tell us. The supervisor directed everyone toward the front entrance. One employee had to unlock the inner doors manually because the automatic system had already been disabled for the night. As we approached the registers, the overhead speakers clicked on. A man's voice said, "Not yet." The words were quiet but clear. Every employee in the store froze. The voice continued, "You're not finished." Then the speakers shut off. Several employees ran for the doors. The store manager shouted at everyone to remain calm, but nobody listened. We crowded into the entrance vestibule while the doors were unlocked. I was one of the last people to step outside. Just before I crossed through the doorway, I looked back across the dark store. At the far end of the main aisle, something moved behind a clothing display. I only saw it for a second. It looked like the shoulder of a person wearing dark clothing. Then it vanished. We gathered in the parking lot while the manager called emergency services. Officers arrived within minutes. They entered through the front and rear doors with flashlights. The store was enormous, and the search took nearly 2 hours. They inspected every department, restroom, office, freezer, loading trailer, and storage container. They also searched the utility space above the ceiling. They didn't find anyone. What they found above the ceiling was worse. There was a platform built between 2 support beams near the garden center. Someone had laid sheets of plywood across the beams to create a narrow floor. On top of it were blankets, canned food, bottles of water, batteries, and several battery-powered lamps. There was also a collection of employee belongings, badges, name tags, locker keys, pieces of uniforms, receipts from the employee cafeteria, photographs that had been removed from the staff bulletin board. Some of the photographs had marks drawn over the employees' faces. Others had dates written on the back. The officers also found a store map. It showed the locations of cameras, exits, telephones, offices, and sections of the sales floor that couldn't be seen from the security room. Several routes had been highlighted. One route led from the ceiling above the seasonal department to a utility hatch above the employee restroom hallway. Another ended near the fitting rooms. A third led to the ceiling above the management office. The person living there had been able to move through much of the building without stepping into a visible aisle. The security manager later told us why he had ordered the evacuation. When he climbed into the ceiling, he saw the plywood platform in the distance. One of the battery lamps was still on. Beside it was a paper plate containing food that had not yet dried. Whoever had been living there had been present recently, possibly within minutes. The store remained closed for the rest of the morning. Employees were interviewed individually. Management tried to determine whether the hidden belongings belonged to anyone currently working there. Most of the badges were old. A few belonged to employees who had quit years earlier. One belonged to a man who had worked in building maintenance before I was hired. According to longtime employees, he had been dismissed after repeated complaints about his behavior. He had spent too much time watching workers through the security cameras, even though camera monitoring wasn't part of his job. Several employees had also complained that he followed them into the parking lot after their shifts. Management had told him not to return to the property. After he was fired, the locks on the public and employee entrances were changed. The maintenance room lock was not. No one knew whether he had kept a copy of the key. Police obtained an old photograph of him and searched the surrounding area. Dogs were brought behind the building and followed a scent through the undeveloped land. The trail ended near a drainage canal running beneath the highway. They never found him. Management tried to reassure us that he had probably fled the area. They installed new locks, additional cameras, motion detectors, and metal barriers around the maintenance access points. The utility openings were supposed to be checked every day. Employees were told they could take paid leave if they didn't feel safe returning immediately. I took 3 days off. When I returned, the building looked normal. The store was busy, music played to the overhead speakers, and customers filled the aisles. Still, I couldn't stop looking up at the ceiling. Every vent seemed large enough for someone to watch through. Every missing ceiling tile looked deliberate. I found myself checking behind displays before walking into narrow areas. Management prohibited employees from discussing the incident with customers. We were told that spreading rumors could create unnecessary fear. The official explanation was that an unauthorized person had been stealing merchandise and using a restricted storage area. They never mentioned that he had been living above us. They never mentioned the photographs. Most employees stopped talking about it after a few weeks. I tried to do the same. Then one of the cashiers failed to return from her meal break. She was an adult who had worked at the store for about 6 months. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her phone went directly to voicemail. The store manager checked the security footage. The cashier had left through the employee entrance at 7:42 that evening. The camera showed her walking toward her car while looking at her phone. She reached the vehicle, unlocked it, and opened the driver's door. Then she stopped. Something appeared to have caught her attention. Near the rear of the parking lot, she closed the car door without getting inside. She walked toward the shopping cart storage area, passed behind the structure, and disappeared from the camera's view. She never returned. The police searched the parking lot and surrounding properties. They found her phone beneath a parked car. There was no sign of a struggle. A camera from a nearby business showed a dark vehicle leaving the area shortly after she disappeared, but the image was too distant to identify the driver or license plate. Her disappearance was not publicly connected to the person who had been living inside the store. Management said there was no evidence linking the two incidents. Most of us didn't believe that. The cashier's photograph had been on the employee bulletin board. When police originally removed the items from the ceiling platform, her photograph had not been among them. But none of us knew whether the man had returned after the search. We didn't know whether he had taken new photographs. After the cashier disappeared, the store began providing security escorts to employees leaving after dark. We had to wait near the entrance until a security worker was available to walk us to our vehicles. I began parking as close to the building as possible. For several weeks, nothing else happened. Then, during an evening shift, I received a call at the service desk. I answered with a standard greeting. No one spoke. I could hear faint traffic in the background. I repeated the greeting. A man asked, "Do they still make you park near the front?" My body went cold. I asked who was calling. He ignored the question. He described my car. He mentioned the color, the damage near one of the wheels, and an object hanging from the rearview mirror. Then he said, "That camera doesn't reach as far as they told you." The call ended. I immediately contacted security. They locked the employee entrances and searched the parking lot. Police arrived and checked the surrounding roads. They found nothing. The call had come through an outside line, but the number was blocked. The security manager reviewed the parking lot cameras. My car was visible, but barely. A light pole blocked part of the driver's side. Anyone crouching between the nearby vehicles could have approached without being clearly recorded. Management offered to move me to daytime shifts. I accepted. I also changed the route I took home each evening. I checked my mirrors constantly and avoided stopping anywhere after work. For a while, that seemed to help. Then I began finding things on my car. The first was an empty water bottle placed upright on the hood. I assumed the customer had left it there. A few days later, I found a damaged employee badge beneath one of the windshield wipers. The photograph and writing had been scraped away. It looked almost identical to the badge I had found behind the seasonal shelves. I gave it to police. They tested it, but I was never told whether they recovered anything useful. After that, I resigned. I didn't give management 2 weeks' notice. I finished my shift, collected the contents of my locker, and told the store manager I would not return. He didn't argue with me. He looked exhausted. Before I left, he admitted something that management had kept from most employees. During the original search of the ceiling platform, police had found a notebook. It contained short observations about workers, what time they arrived, what doors they used, what they ate during breaks, which employees walked to their cars alone. Some entries went back several years. The store manager said my description appeared more than once. One entry mentioned that I checked behind displays when I felt watched. Another described the exact route I used to walk from the grocery department to the employee restroom. The final entry about me had been written during inventory week. It said, "This one notices movement." The manager said he hadn't told me earlier because the police believed the person responsible had left the area. I asked whether the missing cashier was mentioned in the notebook. He hesitated. Then he said yes. Her name appeared on the final page. There was only one sentence beside it. She leaves when called. I walked out of the store and never went back. For the next several months, I stayed with a relative in another part of the state. I sold my car and deleted all of my social media accounts. The missing cashier was never found. Police never identified the dark vehicle that left the parking lot. The former maintenance worker remained a person of interest, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything. Eventually, I found another job. It was in a small office building with controlled entrances and no overnight shifts. I told myself I had taken every reasonable precaution. The new workplace was more than 2 hours from the store. No one there knew where I had worked before. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then one morning, I arrived at the office and found an envelope on my desk. It had no stamp address or writing on the outside. I asked the receptionist who had delivered it. She said it had been sitting near the front entrance when she arrived. Inside was a photograph. It showed me walking from my new car toward the office. The picture had been taken from across the parking lot. There was a date printed in the corner. It was from the previous morning. On the back, someone had drawn a black arrow. The arrow pointed upward. I showed the photograph to the police. They reviewed the office cameras and searched the property. The camera covering the front parking lot had been blocked for 6 minutes that morning. Someone had taped a small piece of cardboard over the lens using a pole or some other long object. The cardboard was removed before the first employee arrived. The police found one partial shoe print beneath the camera. They couldn't identify who left it. I quit that job too. I moved again. I wish I could say the story ended there. I wish I could say the man was eventually arrested, or that the cashier was found alive, or that police discovered some simple explanation for everything. They didn't. I haven't found another photograph. I haven't received another phone call. Years have passed without any clear sign that he still knows where I am. But I still avoid large stores whenever possible. When I have to enter one, I never stay near closing time. I don't walk between tall shelves without checking both ends of the aisle. I don't use employee restrooms, fitting rooms, or any hallway with a ceiling access panel. And whenever I hear an overhead speaker click before an announcement, I stop moving. Most of the time, it is nothing. An employee asking for assistance. A customer being told that the store is about to close. A manager calling someone to the front. But every once in a while, there's a pause after that click. A long stretch of empty air. And during that silence, I remember the dark store, the open maintenance hatch, and the voice telling us we weren't finished. I remember that someone had lived above hundreds of customers for months, possibly years, watching through vents, learning schedules, collecting photographs, waiting for the lights to go out. And I remember the sentence written about the missing cashier. She leaves when called. The worst part is that I still don't know what she heard. I don't know whether someone called her phone, spoke through the intercom, or whispered to her from behind the shopping cart shelter. I only know that she recognized something. She walked away from the safety of her car, and somewhere outside the range of the cameras, someone was waiting for her. I used to work in the online pickup department of a large big box store. Customers place their orders through an app, and employees like me walk through the building collecting the items. We packed everything into numbered plastic containers, stored groceries in coolers or freezers, and brought the orders outside when customers checked in. During the day, the department was chaotic. There were shopping carts everywhere, handheld scanners chirping constantly, and customers waiting in designated parking spaces outside. Most of them were reasonable, but some acted as though ordering online meant every employee in the building had become their personal assistant. The late shift was quieter. Curbside pickup officially ended at 10, but several employees stayed until midnight to prepare the next morning's orders. Once the last customer had left, we could move through the store quickly without navigating around crowded aisles. I preferred those final 2 hours. There were usually only 3 of us working in the pickup department after 10. One employee organized the coolers, another packed completed orders, and the third walked the sales floor collecting merchandise. The building stayed open until 11, but by 10:30, most customers were already gone. The employees at the front began closing registers, while the overnight stocking crew gathered near the receiving area. The store had been remodeled shortly before I started working there. Several departments had been moved, the pickup area had been expanded, and a row of small businesses that once operated near the entrance had been removed. One of those businesses had been a photography studio. Another had handled travel reservations and financial services. After they closed, the store covered the entrances with temporary walls painted the same color as the rest of the building. Unless someone remembered the old layout, they would assume there had never been anything behind them. The photography studio had been located beside the employee hallway near the front restrooms. The temporary wall covering it had a large advertisement attached to it, showing smiling adults holding shopping bags. I walked past that wall several times during every shift. For months, I never gave any thought. The first strange order arrived on a Tuesday night. It appeared on my scanner at 10:17. The customer had ordered only 6 items: a black hooded sweatshirt, a roll of silver tape, bottled water, work gloves, a flashlight, and a prepaid phone charger. Nothing about that combination was necessarily suspicious. We regularly filled unusual orders, and customers often bought items that seemed unrelated. What caught my attention was the pickup time. The customer had selected a time slot beginning at 9 that evening. That time had already passed. Normally, the system marked late orders in red and moved them to a separate list. This order had appeared as though it had just been placed. I asked the employee packing orders whether the system had been delayed. She checked her screen and said she couldn't see the order. I showed her my scanner. She refreshed the department computer. The order still didn't appear. She suggested that I collect the items anyway. Sometimes the handheld scanners updated faster than the main system. I took a cart and began walking to the store. The sweatshirt was in men's clothing. The tape and gloves were in hardware. The flashlight was in sporting goods. The bottled water was near grocery, and the phone charger was locked inside a case in electronics. The order forced me to visit almost every corner of the building. When I scanned the final item, the device made an unfamiliar tone. The screen went blank for a second. Then the order disappeared. There was no message saying it had been canceled. It simply vanished. I returned to the pickup department with the merchandise. The employee packing orders searched the system using the customer's order number, but the number didn't exist. We assumed there had been a software error. I returned everything to the shelves before leaving that night. 2 days later, it happened again. The second order appeared shortly after 10. It contained a bag of dog food, a package of batteries, a shower curtain, a folding knife from Sporting Goods, a box of garbage bags, and a men's belt. Once again, the order did not appear on the main computer. I didn't like the combination of items, but I knew there were innocent explanations for all of them. Someone could be moving into an apartment. Someone could be camping. Someone could have simply added random things they needed. Still, I called the evening supervisor before collecting anything. He looked at the order and said it was probably another system glitch. I asked whether I should ignore it. He told me to fill it. He said canceling a legitimate order could result in a complaint. The store was nearly empty as I walked through it. Closing announcements played over the speakers every few minutes, reminding customers to bring their final purchases to the front. I collected the dog food and batteries first. When I reached the aisle containing shower curtains, I noticed a man standing at the other end. He was an adult, probably in his 40s or 50s. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He wasn't holding a basket or pushing a cart. He stood with both hands in his jacket pockets, facing the shelf. I stepped around my cart to reach the shower curtain. When I looked up again, he was gone. I hadn't heard him walk away. I continued with the order. The folding knives were displayed behind a locked glass door. I used my radio to request assistance from an employee who had access to the Sporting Goods keys. While I waited, I noticed movement reflected in the glass. The man in the dark jacket was standing behind me. He was at least 30 feet away, near the entrance to the aisle. When I turned around, he began walking. He didn't rush. He simply crossed the main walkway and disappeared into automotive supplies. The Sporting Goods employee arrived with the keys. I asked whether he had noticed the man. He said he hadn't. After scanning the final item, the order vanished from my device just like the first one. This time, I immediately went to the security office. The store employed a loss prevention worker who watched the cameras during the evening. I explained what had happened and described the man I had seen. He reviewed footage from the shower curtain aisle. The camera showed me entering with my cart. It also showed the man standing at the far end. He remained there for almost a minute. He never touched any merchandise. When I bent down to scan the shower curtain, he turned and walked out of view. The security worker switched to another camera. The man appeared near the end of the next aisle. Instead of leaving the area, he had walked around and stood on the opposite side of the shelves. He had been less than 10 feet away from me. I couldn't see him because the merchandise blocked my view. On the sporting goods footage, the camera showed him approaching from behind while I waited for the lock case to be opened. He stopped outside the aisle and watched me. When I turned around, he walked away. Security followed him through several camera views. The man never selected any merchandise. He moved from department to department, occasionally stopping behind displays or at the ends of aisles. At 10:53, he entered the front restroom hallway. There were cameras covering the entrance to that hallway, but none inside it. The store closed at 11. Employees checked both restrooms before locking the public entrances. The man was not found inside. The camera never showed him leaving the hallway. We reviewed the recording several times. He entered at 10:53. After that, he disappeared. The hallway contained a men's restroom, women's restroom, a family restroom, 2 employee-only doors, and a temporary wall covering the old photography studio. One employee door led to the break room. The other led to a narrow service corridor connecting several offices. Both doors required a code. Security searched the break room, offices, restrooms, maintenance closets, and nearby departments. They found no one. The emergency exit at the end of the service corridor was alarmed. According to the security system, it had not been opened. The security worker suggested the man might have changed clothing and blended in with the overnight employees. That explanation didn't make sense to me. The overnight crew wore brightly colored safety vests. The man hadn't been carrying one. The supervisor told everyone to watch for him, but allowed the store to close normally. I left through the employee exit with 2 co-workers. As we crossed the parking lot, I kept looking toward the building. Most of the sales floor lights had been turned off. Only the grocery section and main walkway remained illuminated. Near the employee restroom hallway, I thought I saw a dark shape pass behind the temporary wall advertisement. It looked as though someone had moved behind the smiling faces printed on it. I stopped walking. One of my co-workers asked what was wrong. When I pointed toward the wall, nothing moved. From outside, it was difficult to see through the store's reflective front windows. I convinced myself I had seen an employee walking past. The next several shifts were normal. No mysterious orders appeared. Security never identified the man. Management said he was probably a customer who had left through an angle the cameras didn't cover. I tried to forget about him. Then, the following week, an order arrived under the customer name Waiting. That was the only word in the name field. It appeared at 10:31. The order contained one item, a disposable camera. The store didn't sell many disposable cameras anymore, but a few were kept near electronics. I showed the order to the other 2 pickup employees. It wasn't visible on their devices. I called the supervisor and told him I wasn't filling it. He agreed. He took my scanner, photographed the screen with his phone, and contacted the company's technical support line. While he waited on hold, the order changed. The disposable camera disappeared from the item list. It was replaced by a package of blank adhesive labels. Then the labels disappeared. The new item was a red permanent marker. The order changed again. The 4th item was a box cutter. After that, the device displayed a message. It was not a standard substitution request. The message appeared in the section customers use to provide delivery instructions. It said, "Send the one with the glasses." I was the only employee in the pickup department wearing glasses at night. The supervisor immediately took the scanner to security. The store manager was called at home. All 3 of us were told to stop working and remain in the pickup room while security searched the building. The pickup room was separated from the sales floor by swinging doors. It had refrigerators along one wall, freezers along another, and rows of metal shelves filled with completed orders. The only exterior access was a door used to bring merchandise to waiting vehicles. That door remained locked unless an employee scanned a badge. At 10:46, the curbside arrival alarm sounded. A screen on the wall showed that a customer had checked into parking space 12. It was the order under the name Waiting. The order number matched the one on my scanner. The supervisor told us to stay inside. He and the security worker went outside together. Space 12 was at the far end of the pickup parking area. No vehicle was parked there. The parking space was empty. The security worker checked behind nearby cars and shopping cart shelters. No one was there. The arrival remained active on the screen. The estimated customer wait time continued counting upward. At 5 minutes, the system issued a warning. At 10 minutes, it changed from yellow to red. The order could not be canceled. The supervisor restarted the computer. When the system came back on, the customer was still checked into space 12. Then the department phone rang. The employee beside me answered it. She used the standard greeting. A man asked whether his order was coming out. She asked for his name. He said, "Waiting." The employee's face changed. She placed the call on speakerphone so the rest of US could hear. The supervisor asked where the customer was parked. The man said space 12. The supervisor told him there was no vehicle in that space. The caller paused. Then he said, "You sent the wrong ones." The supervisor asked what he meant. The man said, "I requested the one with the glasses." I backed away from the phone. The supervisor demanded the caller identify himself. Instead, the man described what I was wearing. He mentioned the color of my shirt, my shoes, and the plastic identification badge clipped near my shoulder. He said I was standing beside the freezer door. That was exactly where I was. There were no windows in the pickup room. The only cameras were mounted near the ceiling. The security office could see us, but no customer could. The supervisor looked toward one of the cameras. He asked the caller whether he worked for the store. The man laughed quietly. Then he said, "Not anymore." The call disconnected. The store manager ordered the building evacuated. Employees gathered at the front entrance while security checked the pickup room, ceiling panels, and connecting hallways. Police arrived and conducted a search. They found no intruder. The call had come from a prepaid phone. The number stopped working immediately afterward. Company technicians examined the online ordering system. They insisted the strange orders had not been placed through a normal customer account. Someone had apparently gained access to a test function used during the store's remodel. Before the pickup department opened, contractors had created fake orders to test scanners, coolers, parking notifications, and employee routes. The testing account was supposed to have been deleted. The technicians disabled it. Management told us the problem had been solved. They believed a former contractor had retained the login information and was using it to frighten employees. Police requested a list of every contractor who had worked on the remodel. There were dozens. Some had been hired through other companies. A few records were incomplete. The man seen on camera could not be clearly identified because of the cap and the poor image quality. For several weeks, security escorted us to our cars. The pickup department also stopped accepting orders after 9. Management installed a second camera inside the pickup room and changed the access code to the employee hallway. Nothing unusual happened. Gradually, everyone relaxed. One of the employees who worked with me was especially relieved. She was an adult in her late 20s and had started in the department shortly after I did. She was quiet, dependable, and usually volunteered to take orders outside because she disliked packing groceries in the cramped pickup room. She had been the one who answered the call from the man, using the name Waiting. After the incident, she started parking near the front entrance. She also refused to take orders to Space 12. Customers rarely selected their own parking spaces. They simply entered the number of the space they had chosen after arriving. Whenever someone checked into 12, she asked another employee to handle it. Most of us understood. A month passed. Then Space 12 was removed. Management placed 2 orange traffic cones across it and attached a sign saying the space was temporarily unavailable. We weren't told why. The next night, someone moved the cones. They were found behind the building near the loading area. Security reviewed the parking lot footage. At 3:14 in the morning, one cone shifted slightly. A minute later, it tipped over. The second cone moved across the pavement and disappeared outside the camera's view. No person appeared in the recording. The security worker believed someone had stayed close to the ground beneath the camera's angle. The loading area camera showed both cones being placed beside the compactor at 3:23. Again, no person was visible. The cones seemed to slide into the frame by themselves. The store manager contacted police, but there wasn't much they could do. The cones were checked for fingerprints. We never heard the results. Management closed space 12 permanently. They painted over the number and reassigned the remaining spaces. For a while, that was the end of it. Then the quiet employee disappeared. It happened during a Friday closing shift. The store was unusually busy, and the pickup department had fallen behind. At 9:38, a customer checked into the space that had been numbered 11 before the parking area was rearranged. After the changes, that same physical location was labeled 10. The order contained groceries and a large television. The quiet employee loaded the groceries onto a cart, while another employee went to retrieve the television from the locked storage area. The customer had selected no bags, which meant the groceries had been packed loosely into plastic containers. The quiet employee said she would take the food outside first. She scanned the exterior door, pushed the cart into the parking lot, and turned toward Space 10. The security camera showed her walking past the first several vehicles. When she reached the former Space 12, she stopped. The location had been painted over, but a faint outline of the old number was still visible beneath the new paint. The employee looked down at her handheld scanner. Then she looked toward the shopping cart shelter. She left the order cart in the parking space and walked toward the shelter. The shelter blocked the camera's view for approximately 5 seconds. She never emerged from the other side. The customer waiting in Space 10 called the department several minutes later and complained that no employee had arrived. We found the cart abandoned in the painted-over parking space. The customer's groceries were still inside the containers. The employee's scanner was lying on the pavement near the shelter. Her identification badge had been placed on top of it. Her phone and car keys were gone. The employee's vehicle was still parked near the front entrance. Police locked down the property. They searched every car in the lot, the drainage areas, the loading yard, and the undeveloped field behind the building. Search dogs followed her scent from the shopping cart shelter to the side of the store. The trail ended beside a fire exit near the employee restroom hallway. The door had not triggered an alarm. Security checked the electronic records. According to the system, the door had not opened. Police reviewed the camera covering that side of the building. The recording skipped forward 11 minutes, at exactly the time the employee disappeared. The security company initially described it as a technical failure. The officers did not believe that. The store closed for 2 days. We were interviewed separately. I told police about the fake orders, the phone call, the man in the dark jacket, and the former photography studio. The officer interviewing me had not heard about the studio. I explained that it was behind the temporary wall near the restrooms. He asked whether police had searched it during the previous incidents. I didn't know. I assumed they had. The temporary wall looked permanent from the sales floor. There was no handle, door frame, or visible opening. The officer contacted the store manager. The manager said the old studio was empty and inaccessible. According to the renovation plans, the entrance had been sealed. The officer asked whether there was another way inside. The manager said there shouldn't be. Police examined the wall. The advertisement showing the smiling shoppers was attached to several large panels. When officers removed it, they found that one panel was different from the others. Its edges had been filled with flexible sealant instead of construction adhesive. The panel could be pulled outward using 2 suction cups. Behind it was the old photography studio. The electricity had been disconnected years earlier, but the room was not empty. Someone had been using it. A mattress lay on the floor behind the former reception desk. Shelves contained bottled water, canned food, batteries, cleaning supplies, and clothing. A small monitor displayed live footage from 4 hidden cameras. One camera showed the pickup room. Another showed the employee break room. The third showed the entrance to the restroom hallway. The fourth showed the parking spaces outside. The camera feeds were wireless. Police found tiny devices hidden inside a wall clock, a ceiling vent, an exit sign, and a curbside parking shelter. There was also a workbench covered with electronic equipment. Printed diagrams showed the store's alarm system and camera positions. Several company uniforms hung from hooks on the wall. There were uniforms for maintenance workers, delivery drivers, overnight stockers, and outside cleaning contractors. A collection of copied badges was arranged inside a plastic case. Some were convincing enough to open employee doors. The officers found dozens of online pickup labels. Each label listed an employee number, the time an item had been scanned, and a department where it was located. Someone had used the fake orders to track how quickly employees moved through the store. A hand-drawn chart showed our routes. My route had been marked in blue. The quiet employee's route was marked in red. Beside her employee number, someone had written, "Always comes outside." The police also found photographs. Some had been taken inside the store. Others showed employees getting into their cars, eating at nearby restaurants, or entering their homes. The quiet employee appeared in more photographs than anyone else. In one, she was sleeping on her couch. The picture had been taken through a window. Police searched her home immediately. There was no sign of forced entry, but one screen had been removed from a rear window and carefully replaced. A small camera was hidden inside a smoke detector in her living room. The camera had been transmitting to the room behind the store's wall. There was no sign of the missing employee inside the old studio. At the back of the room, officers found a second door concealed behind black curtains. It opened into a service passage that ran between the store's interior walls. The passage had been used for plumbing and electrical access before the remodel. Most employees didn't know it existed. It connected the former photography studio to several maintenance closets, the service corridor, and the fire exit where the search dogs had lost the employee's scent. The electronic alarm on that exit had been bypassed. Police followed the passage toward the rear of the building. Near the guarded apartment, they found a locked door. The store manager's master key didn't open it. Officers forced it. The room on the other side had once been used to store seasonal displays. The missing employee was inside. She was alive. She had been restrained to a chair with plastic ties and had tape across her mouth, but she did not appear to have suffered any serious physical injuries. A hood had been placed over her head. Headphones covered her ears. An audio recording played on a loop. The recording contained voices from the pickup department. Our voices. It included normal conversations we had at work, calls with customers, and pieces of announcements made over the radio. Every few minutes, the man's voice interrupted. He asked the employee questions. Did she recognize the voices? Did she know which employee was speaking? Could she tell whether the recording had been made inside or outside the store? The questions became more personal. Which co-worker would notice she was missing first? Which manager would assume she had quit? How long would the store continue filling orders after an employee disappeared? The employee had been missing for almost 8 hours when police found her. The person responsible was gone. A small exterior door behind the garden center had been cut open from the inside. Tire tracks led away from the building through the undeveloped field. Police believed the abductor had been watching the search through the hidden cameras. When officers discovered the old studio, he abandoned the storage room and fled. The quiet employee spent several days in the hospital. She never returned to work. The store offered counseling to everyone in the department. Management removed the temporary wall and emptied the former studio. Contractors searched every unused space in the building. They found several additional hiding places. One was above the restroom ceiling. Another was inside a hollow advertising display near grocery. The most disturbing was beneath the curbside parking shelter. The concrete base included a metal access panel intended for electrical wiring. Someone had widened the opening and created a space beneath it large enough for an adult to lie inside. There was a narrow viewing gap near ground level. From there, a person could watch employees approaching the parked cars without being seen by the overhead cameras. Police believe the man had hidden inside the base on the night the employee disappeared. When she reached the former Space 12, he used her scanner to send a message. The scanner record showed a substitution notification appearing at 9:40. The order had not originally contained a substitution. Someone with access to the test account added one. The message said, "Item located behind shelter." The employee assumed the customer had dropped something or that another worker had left part of the order there. She walked behind the shelter. The man was waiting. Police believed he forced her through the fire exit and into the hidden service passage. The entire abduction took less than a minute. The waiting customer saw nothing. The parking lot was busy, brightly lit, and surrounded by cameras. None of it protected her. Investigators eventually identified a suspect. He had worked for a subcontractor during the remodel. His job had involved installing network cables, pickup department equipment, and security devices. He had access to the old floor plans. He also helped test the online ordering system. After the remodel was completed, the subcontractor dismissed him for stealing equipment. The theft was never reported to police because the company recovered most of the missing property. The store had no record banning him from the building. For years, he had been able to enter as a customer. Police searched his registered address. The house was empty. Neighbors said he had moved out several months earlier. Inside, officers found maps, employee schedules, and photographs of multiple stores. Our store was not the only one he had visited. He had studied at least 4 other big box locations. 2 had similar pickup departments. 1 had been remodeled by the same subcontractor. Police released his image to the public. The photograph was clearer than the footage from our store. I recognized him immediately. He was a man in a dark jacket who had watched me collect a second fake order. He was never arrested. His vehicle was found abandoned near a bus station several weeks later. The interior had been cleaned. There was no evidence showing where he went. The quiet employee eventually moved away. Before leaving, she contacted me once. She said she remembered very little about the abduction itself. The headphones had blocked most outside sounds. The room was dark beneath the hood, and the chair had been positioned so she couldn't move. She remembered the recording of our voices. She also remembered the man entering the room several times. He rarely touched her. He mostly stood nearby and asked questions. At one point, he removed the headphones and asked why she refused to use Space 12. She told him she knew he had been watching it. He said she was wrong. He wasn't watching the parking space. He was watching to see who noticed it. Then he asked her about me. He wanted to know where I lived. He wanted to know whether I had changed cars. He asked whether I still wore glasses outside of work. She refused to answer. The man told her it didn't matter. He said the fake orders had already taught him everything he needed to know about us. I quit immediately after hearing that. I moved to another town and found a job that had nothing to do with retail. For more than a year, I avoided ordering anything through curbside pickup. I didn't want my address, vehicle, or shopping habits connected to another store system. Eventually, I started using it again. I knew the suspect couldn't realistically be monitoring every big box store in the country. I told myself he had probably left the area or been arrested under another name. The first few orders were normal. I checked in, entered my parking space number, and waited for an employee to bring out the bags. Then, one evening, I placed an order at a store more than 200 miles from the one where I had worked. I arrived shortly before sunset. The pickup parking area was almost empty. I parked in Space 6 and checked in through the app. A few minutes later, the order status changed. Instead of saying an employee was bringing my items, the screen displayed a substitution request. I hadn't ordered anything that required a substitution. I opened the message. The original item field was blank. The replacement item was also blank. The customer note contained 5 words. "You still wear the glasses." I locked my doors and drove away. I called the store from the road and asked them to cancel the order. The employee who answered said there was no order under my account. When I checked the app again, the message was gone. My purchase history showed that I had never placed an order that day. Police searched the parking lot and reviewed the cameras. They didn't find the suspect. One camera showed my vehicle entering and leaving. As I drove out of the pickup area, a man stepped from behind the shopping cart shelter. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He watched my car until it disappeared from view. Then he approached Space 6. He crouched beside the painted number and placed something on the pavement. Police found it there. It was a disposable camera. The film had already been used. Investigators developed the photographs. Most of them showed me. There were pictures of me entering my new workplace, carrying groceries to my home, and filling my car at a gas station. The final photograph had been taken inside the store where I placed the order. It showed an employee walking toward the pickup room. On the back, someone had written, "Always comes outside." I worked at the returns desk of a large big box store for a little over 3 years. The store sold nearly everything: groceries, clothing, appliances, furniture, tools, electronics, gardening supplies, and enough household products to fill several warehouses. The returns desk sat near the main entrance, directly across from the row of checkout lanes. Most days, the job was more exhausting than frightening. Customers returned clothing they had clearly worn, tools covered in dirt, empty packages, food that had been left in hot cars, and televisions that had been replaced with older broken models. Some people became aggressive when we refused them. Others tried to distract us while someone else walked out with merchandise. After enough time at the desk, I became good at recognizing dishonesty. I could usually tell when a customer was rehearsing a story or when someone was waiting for the right moment to cause a scene. The incident that made me quit began with a plastic storage container. It was one of the largest containers the store sold. It was made from thick gray plastic and had a black lid secured by 2 locking handles. A man brought it to the desk shortly after 9 one evening. He was an adult, probably in his late 40s. He wore work boots, faded jeans, and a plain jacket. There was nothing especially memorable about him. He placed the container on a flat cart and handed me a receipt. According to the receipt, he had purchased it 3 days earlier. I asked whether anything was wrong with it. He said the lid did not fit properly. The container was closed, and the handles were locked. I started to open it so I could check for damage. The man placed his hand on top of the lid. "You don't need to do that," he said. He didn't sound angry, but his hand remained there. I explained that we had to inspect returned merchandise. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he removed his hand. The container was heavier than an empty plastic bin should have been. I unlocked one handle. A sour smell came through the gap. It reminded me of wet carpet. The man watched me closely. When I lifted the lid, I found several folded towels inside. They were damp and stained with dirt. Beneath them were disposable cleaning cloths, empty food containers, and a pair of worn work gloves. It looked as though someone had used the bin while cleaning a garage. I told the man we could not return it in that condition. He asked why. I explained that the container was full of used items. He claimed the towels had been inside when he bought it. That was impossible. The bins were stored with their lids removed and stacked separately on the sales floor. The man said someone at the store must have placed the towels inside before he made the purchase. I repeated that the return could not be accepted. His expression remained calm. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked for my full name. I pointed to the first name printed on my employee badge. He leaned closer and read it. Then he asked what time I usually left work. I thought he was trying to intimidate me. I called the front-end supervisor. The man waited without speaking. When the supervisor arrived, I explained the situation. She looked inside the bin and refused a return. The man asked for her full name too. She told him to leave. He took the container, placed it back on the cart, and walked toward the exit. Before passing through the doors, he looked over his shoulder at me. Then he smiled. I reported the interaction to store security. The security worker reviewed the camera footage and saved an image of the man. He said the customer had not made a direct threat, but we should call security if he returned. I did not see him again for almost 2 weeks. The second time, he came in during the afternoon. I was helping another customer when I noticed him waiting at the end of the line. He was holding a small cardboard box. When it was his turn, he placed the box on the counter. I asked whether he had a receipt. He said the item was not a return. "It belongs to you," he said. I asked what he meant. He pushed the box toward me. There was no writing or a shipping label on it. I told him I could not accept personal packages at work. He said, "You'll want this one." Then he turned and walked away. I called security before touching the box. The same security worker arrived and carried it into the office. The box was not sealed. Inside was my employee's sweater. I had left it in the break room several days earlier. I kept the sweater folded on top of my locker because it was too thick to fit inside. I assumed another employee had moved it. The man should not have been able to access the break room. The door was located in an employee-only hallway and required a keypad code. Security searched the break room and checked the lockers. Nothing else appeared to be missing. The camera covering the employee hallway showed no customers entering. The security worker then reviewed footage from the front of the store. The man had entered through the main doors, carrying the box. He walked directly to the returns desk. There was no footage showing how he obtained the sweater. Management changed the code to the employee hallway. They also reminded everyone not to allow customers to follow them through secure doors. I asked whether the police should be contacted. The store manager said there was no proof the man had stolen the sweater. Another employee could have given it to him as a joke. I did not find that explanation convincing. No one in the break room knew the man. Most employees did not even know the sweater belonged to me. The manager told me to document the incident and contact security if the customer returned. 3 days later, another employee received a package. She worked at the pharmacy counter on the opposite side of the store. An adult man approached her near the end of her shift and handed her a shopping bag. The man was not the same person I had seen. He was younger, wore business clothing, and appeared confused when security stopped him. He claimed a stranger in the parking lot had paid him $20 to bring the bag inside. The stranger had described the pharmacy employee and told him to hand it directly to her. Inside the bag was a coffee mug. The mug had been taken from the employee's home. She recognized it because it had a small crack near the handle. She had used it that morning and left it in her kitchen sink. There was no sign that anyone had forced entry into her house. Nothing else was missing. The employee lived alone in an apartment several miles from the store. Police were contacted. The younger man cooperated and described the stranger who had paid him. His description matched the customer who had tried to return the storage container. Police reviewed the parking lot footage. A vehicle had stopped near the younger man for less than a minute. The driver's face was not visible. The license plate had been covered. The vehicle left before security became involved. The pharmacy employee was sent home with a police escort. The next day, she changed the locks on her apartment. She also installed a camera near the front door. Management held a meeting with the department supervisors. We were told not to accept packages, bags, or merchandise from strangers. Security escorts were made available to employees leaving after dark. The store manager insisted the incidents were probably connected to a customer complaint. He believed someone was trying to frighten employees after being denied a return. That explanation raised an obvious question. How had the man learned where the pharmacy employee lived? She had never interacted with him. She had not been present when I refused the storage container. The police suggested the man could have followed employees home from the parking lot. For the next several weeks, everyone became more careful. Employees checked their mirrors while driving. Some changed their routes home. Several stopped wearing their store uniforms outside the building. Nothing happened during that time. The man did not return. No more packages were delivered. Eventually, the store stopped offering escorts unless someone specifically requested one. The incident began to feel less urgent. Then another storage container appeared at the returns desk. It happened on a Monday morning before I arrived. A customer left a large gray bin on the floor beside the counter. The customer told an employee he had changed his mind about the purchase and did not want a refund. He walked out before anyone could question him. The employee assumed the container was empty and moved it behind the desk. When I came in that afternoon, the bin was still there. It was the same model the original man had attempted to return. The lid was secured with black locking handles. A white adhesive label had been placed on top. My first name was handwritten on it. I called security. The store manager and 2 police officers were present when the container was opened. Inside were several objects arranged in separate plastic bags. The first bag contained a copy of the weekly employee schedule. The second held printed photographs of employees entering and leaving the building. The third contained receipts from nearby restaurants. Each receipt had an employee's first name written on it. The final bag held keys. There were 12 of them. Some appeared to be house keys. Others looked like vehicle keys or keys to small padlocks. A number had been written on a tag attached to each one. The police photographed everything and began asking employees whether they recognized keys. 3 of them did. One key belonged to a cashier who had lost it several months earlier. She assumed it had fallen from her key ring. Another belonged to a maintenance employee's outdoor storage unit. The third opened the front door of a stocker's house. The stocker did not know the key was missing. He checked his key ring and discovered that the original had been replaced with a copy. The replacement looked almost identical. Someone had taken his house key, copied it, and returned another key to his ring. Police advised every employee whose photograph appeared in the container to change their locks. Most of us were in at least one picture. The photographs had been taken over several months. Some showed employees in the parking lot. Others were taken near their homes. One photograph showed me standing in line at a grocery store across town. Another showed me sitting inside my car during a meal break. The photographer had been close enough to capture the screen of my phone. I could see a text conversation in the image. It was too blurry to read, but I knew the person taking it had been only a few spaces away from me. The store temporarily increased security. Police reviewed the employee schedule found in the bin. It was not a printout from the office computer. It was a photograph of the schedule posted inside the break room. The picture had been taken from several feet away. The break room camera showed nothing unusual. Employees entered and left throughout the day, but no customer was visible. Police began focusing on current and former workers. Everyone with access to the break room was questioned. The original man's image was compared with personnel records. He had never officially worked for the store, at least not under his real appearance. The store had hundreds of employees and a high turnover rate. Seasonal workers came and went constantly. Vendors, cleaners, repair technicians, delivery drivers, and construction crews entered the building every week. It was possible the man had worked inside under another name or had worn a disguise. The security worker reviewed older footage. He found several recordings of the man walking to the store during the previous year. Sometimes he wore a baseball cap. Sometimes he wore glasses. In one recording, he pushed a shopping cart filled with merchandise. In another, he wore a reflective vest and carried a clipboard. Employees repeatedly opened secure doors for him. He never forced his way into restricted areas. He waited near the doors until someone approached, then acted as though he belonged there. Most people held the door open without questioning him. The store manager told employees to challenge anyone without a visible badge. That instruction created several arguments with legitimate vendors, but no one saw the man again. About a month after Ben was discovered, I was promoted to return supervisor. I considered declining the position. Part of me wanted to leave the store entirely, but the promotion included a significant raise. I also believed the man had moved on. The police had circulated his photograph, and security was watching for him. My new responsibilities included closing the returns desk at night. After the store closed, I counted the register, completed paperwork, and moved damaged merchandise into the claims area behind customer service. The claims area was separated from the sales floor by a swinging door. Returned electronics, broken appliances, leaking cleaning products, and open packages were stored there until they could be inspected or discarded. One evening, I noticed that several damaged storage containers had been moved. They had been stacked near the back wall the previous night. Now they were lined up beside the claims desk. There were 7 of them. All were gray with black lids. I asked the morning employee why she had moved them. She said she hadn't. I checked the inventory labels. The containers had been returned at different times over the previous 6 months. Most were damaged and waiting to be destroyed. Someone had removed the store labels from the lids. In their place, each container had a white adhesive label. The labels were numbered 1 through 7. I called security. The security worker inspected the containers with me. The first 6 were empty. The 7th was locked. A thin metal cable had been wrapped through both handles and secured with small padlock. The security worker used bolt cutters to remove it. Inside was a battery-powered screen. The screen turned on as soon as the lid opened. It displayed a live camera feed. We were looking at ourselves. The camera filming us was hidden somewhere inside the claims area. The security worker closed the lid and called the police. Officers searched the room. They found a tiny camera concealed inside a smoke detector above the claims desk. The device transmitted wirelessly to the screen inside the container. It had been installed recently. Dust around the smoke detector had been disturbed. The claims area was behind two employee-only doors. There was no public access. The camera contained a memory card. Police reviewed the recordings. Most of the footage showed employees sorting returns. The recording began 9 days earlier. During the first night, shortly after the store closed, a person entered the room. He wore a store uniform identification badge and baseball cap. The cap concealed much of his face. He moved directly beneath the camera and looked up. It was the man from the original return. He watched the lens for several seconds. Then he held a finger to his lips. He remained inside the claims area for almost an hour. He opened damaged packages, searched through employee paperwork, and examined personal belongings stored beneath the desk. At one point, he picked up my jacket. He pressed it against his face and breathed into the fabric. He then folded it neatly and returned it. Before leaving, he placed a screen inside the 7th container. He also attached the numbered labels. The following night, he returned. This time, he brought a folding chair. He sat in the dark corner of the claims area and watched the employees through a narrow gap beside the swinging door. The recording lasted nearly 4 hours. During that time, several employees entered. None noticed him. He remained completely still whenever the door opened. The corner was blocked by stacked merchandise and could not be seen from the desk. On the 3rd night, he did the same thing. He sat behind the returns and watched. The recording showed him entering the claims area on 6 separate nights. Sometimes he took photographs. Sometimes he wrote in a notebook. Once, after I left the room, he followed me to the door and stood on the other side, listening to my footsteps. Police checked every current employee badge. The one he wore in the recording belonged to a worker who had quit 2 years earlier. That employee said the badge had been returned to management on his final day. The badge should have been destroyed. Police searched the store again. They inspected offices, storage areas, restrooms, the roof, and the loading yard. They found no one. The man had already left. Security reviewed footage from the night he installed the camera. The front entrance recording showed him entering at 8:12 in the evening. He wore a store uniform beneath an open jacket. He purchased a bottle of water at a self-checkout register. At 8:37, he entered the employee hallway behind a group of workers returning from break. At 11:06, after the store had closed, he walked out through the employee exit with the overnight crew. He had spent almost 3 hours inside restricted areas without being questioned. The store manager announced that all badges would be replaced. Employees would have to scan into secure hallways instead of entering a code. Security workers would inspect badges at the employee entrance. The claims area was reorganized, so there were no hidden corners. The cameras were upgraded. Management assured us that the man would not be able to enter again. I stopped believing their assurances. I requested a transfer to a daytime position. While the request was being processed, I continued closing the desk. I refused to enter the claims area alone. Another supervisor stayed with me every night. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then an elderly customer returned a large area rug. She had ordered it through the store's delivery service. According to her, the rug had arrived wrapped in thick plastic. When she opened it at home, she found a wallet rolled inside. She assumed it belonged to a warehouse employee. The wallet contained an expired driver's license, several photographs, and an old store identification badge. The identification belonged to a woman who had worked at our location several years earlier. Management contacted her using the information in her old personnel file. She had moved to another state. When police reached her, she said the wallet had been stolen from her locker on her final day at the store. She had reported it to management. Nothing had been done because there was no camera inside the locker room. The photographs inside the wallet were not hers. They showed current employees. I appeared in 2 of them. One had been taken inside the claims area. It showed me bending over the desk while completing paperwork. The hidden camera had already been removed by the time the rug was delivered. The second photograph showed me asleep in my bedroom. The picture had been taken from inside the room. I lived in an apartment on the second floor. My bedroom window faced a narrow balcony. The balcony door was always locked. Police searched my apartment. They found no sign of forced entry. The balcony door lock was undamaged. Nothing appeared to be missing. Then an officer noticed a faint line scratched into the metal near the latch. Someone had used a thin tool to manipulate the lock from outside. The officer asked whether I had ever found the balcony door open. I remembered waking one morning and feeling cold air in the apartment. I had assumed I had failed to close the door completely. The man had been inside my home while I slept. He had stood close enough to photograph my face. After that, I stopped staying. I moved in with a relative and gave police permission to install a camera inside my bedroom. For several nights, nothing happened. On the fifth night, the balcony door moved. At 2:43 in the morning, the handle slowly turned. The door opened less than an inch. It stopped. Whoever was outside seemed to notice the new camera. A dark object appeared near the glass. The camera feed went black. Police officers were stationed in an unmarked vehicle nearby. They reached the apartment within minutes. The balcony was empty. A rope hung from the roof. Someone had climbed down from the building's maintenance access. The roof door had been propped open with a small piece of plastic. Officers searched the property and surrounding streets. They did not find a man. On the balcony, they found another white label. It was attached to the door. The label had the number 8 written on it. Police believed the number containers had represented stages. They didn't know what the numbers meant. Neither did I. I resigned the next morning. I moved out of the apartment and stayed with family in another city. I changed my phone number, closed my social media accounts, and bought a different car. The pharmacy employee who had received the stolen coffee mug also moved away. Several other workers quit. The store continued operating. Management removed the claims area camera and added security gates near the employee hallway. The man stopped appearing on store footage. For nearly a year, I heard nothing about him. Then I received a call from a former co-worker. She still worked at the returns desk. She told me that someone had brought in another storage container. It had been left outside the entrance before the store opened. The container was gray with a black lid. A white label on top displayed the number 9. Police opened it. Inside were several store uniforms, copied employee badges, maps, photographs, and printed schedules. There was also a model of the store made from cardboard. The roof could be removed. Tiny figures had been placed inside different departments. One figure stood behind the returns desk. Another stood at the pharmacy. Several were positioned in the parking lot. A figure resembling the original man stood near the front entrance. The model included a small plastic storage container in the claims area. When police opened that miniature container, they found a folded piece of paper. It contained an address. It was the address of the house where I was staying. Police were sent there immediately. They searched the property in nearby streets. They found no one. There were no unfamiliar vehicles. Nothing inside the house had been disturbed. The officers advised my relatives and me to stay somewhere else. We packed a few belongings and left that evening. Before walking out, I checked every door and window. Everything was locked. As I carried my bag to the garage, I noticed a gray storage container on a shelf. My relative used several of them for holiday decorations. They all had black lids. One container looked newer than the others. A white label was attached to it. The label had no number. It had my first name. I called the officers back. They removed the container from the garage and opened it in the driveway. Inside was a folded store uniform. It was my old uniform. I had left it in my apartment when I moved. Beneath, it was a stack of photographs. They showed the house from several angles. Some had been taken from the street. Others had been taken through windows. The newest photograph showed the police searching the property earlier that day. The picture had been taken from inside the house. At the bottom of the container was a small voice recorder. An officer pressed play. At first, there was only silence. Then we heard quiet breathing. After several seconds, a man whispered, "Returns must be inspected." The recording continued. We heard footsteps moving across the floor. A door opened. Then came the sound of a conversation. It was my relative and me speaking in the kitchen the previous night. The recording had been made inside the house. The final sound was a plastic lid locking into place. Police searched the entire property again. In the attic, they found a sleeping bag, bottled water, food wrappers, and a battery-powered fan. The insulation near the attic entrance had been compressed. Someone had been hiding above us. The man was gone. A vent near the side of the roof had been removed and replaced. Officers believed he had climbed out before they arrived. They never caught him. The original man's face was eventually distributed to stores throughout the region, but police could not identify him. The address he used on the first receipt was fake. The payment card had been purchased with cash. The vehicle seen in the parking lot had been reported stolen. The fingerprints recovered from the containers did not match any criminal database. Police believed he had carefully planned every contact. They also believed he had help or access to information from inside the company. There were too many things he knew: schedules, old personnel records, employee addresses, delivery routes, badge numbers, which returned items would be sent to which warehouse. The investigation expanded to other stores. Several employees reported similar incidents. A worker at another location received a package containing photographs of her home. A store supervisor found a copied key taped beneath his car. An employee at a distribution center discovered a gray container in an unused trailer. Inside were uniforms from multiple stores. No one knew how long the man had been doing it. The numbered labels were never explained. Police recovered containers marked as high as 16. They were found in different buildings across several states. Some were empty. Some contained employee belongings. One held nothing but photographs of store entrances taken at closing time. Years have passed since I left retail. I no longer work around customers. I avoid posting photographs online, and I never tell coworkers exactly where I live. I check my locks every night. I inspect packages before carrying them into the house. I do not use storage containers with locking lids. Whenever I enter a big box store, I still look toward the returns desk. I watch the people standing in line. Most are ordinary customers holding receipts and unwanted merchandise. But sometimes I see someone with a large gray container resting on a flat cart. I watch their hands. I wait to see whether they allow the employee to open the lid. A few months ago, I visited a store in another part of the country. I needed one item, and I intended to leave quickly. As I passed the returns desk, I saw a man standing beside a gray container. He wore work boots, faded jeans, and a plain jacket. His back was turned toward me. I stopped walking. The employee behind the counter reached for one of the locking handles. The man placed his hand on the lid. "You don't need to do that," he said. I recognized the voice. I left my car in the aisle and walked quickly toward the exit. I did not look back until I was inside my car. The man was standing near the store entrance. He was watching me through the glass. He looked older than I remembered, but I was certain it was him. He raised one hand. Between two fingers, he held a white adhesive label. Something was written on it. I could not read the words from that distance. The man smiled and pressed the label against the glass. Then he pointed toward my car. I drove away. When I reached home, I found a gray plastic container sitting in the center of my garage. The garage door had been closed when I left. The lid was locked. A white label was attached to the top. It contained only 2 words: "Final return." I called the police and waited outside. The container was opened by a bomb technician. There were no explosives inside. There was no weapon. There was nothing illegal. The container held a blanket, several bottles of water, canned food, work gloves, copy keys, and printed photographs of every place I had lived since leaving the store. At the very bottom was a photograph of me standing in the parking lot earlier that day. It had been taken through the windshield of my own car. On the back, someone had written, "You finally inspected it." I was the closing operations supervisor at a large big box store for almost 5 years. The building was open from early morning until 11 at night, and on most evenings, my job was simple. I walked the sales floor, answered employee calls, handled customer complaints, checked the emergency exits, and made sure every department had been cleared before the front doors were locked. The store was much bigger than it looked from the parking lot. It had a grocery section, clothing, electronics, furniture, tools, automotive supplies, a pharmacy, and a seasonal garden center that extended into an outdoor fenced area. Behind the sales floor was a stockroom that ran nearly the entire length of the building. It contained loading docks, compactors, industrial shelving, offices, employee rooms, and service corridors that most customers never knew existed. I knew the building well. I knew which ceiling lights flickered before they failed. I knew which freezer alarm went off whenever the temperature outside dropped too quickly. I knew which emergency door had to be pulled twice before the sensor recognized it was closed. Knowing the building made me feel safe there. That changed during a severe storm one autumn evening. The weather had been getting worse throughout my shift. Rain struck the front windows in heavy sheets, and strong wind pushed abandoned shopping carts across the parking lot. Customers stood near the entrance, recording the sky with their phones. The Weather Service had issued several warnings, but storms were common in that part of the country. Most people continued shopping. At approximately 9:20, every phone in the building produced the same emergency alert. A tornado had been detected nearby. The warning instructed everyone to seek shelter immediately. Seconds later, the city sirens began sounding outside. We had rehearsed the procedure during employee training, although we had never used it during a real emergency. Customers were directed away from the windows and moved toward the center of the building. Employees guided them into the interior corridors near the restrooms, fitting rooms, and training room. The pharmacy closed its metal gate. The front-end employees abandoned the registers. The automatic entrance doors were locked to prevent anyone from walking outside. There were approximately 50 customers and employees in the building when the warning began. Most were frightened but cooperative. A few complained that they needed to leave before the roads became worse. One man attempted to force open the front doors until a security employee threatened to call the police. The storm grew louder. The roof above the sales floor vibrated under the wind. Somewhere in the garden center, metal display racks began banging against one another. The electricity flickered twice. Each time the lights returned, several customers gasped. Then the main power failed. The emergency system activated immediately. Dim lights illuminated the main walkways and interior corridors. Backup power kept the freezers, security office, alarms, and a few cash registers running. The building became quiet except for the storm. Without the normal lights and music, the store fell hollow. Every sound traveled through it. After approximately 20 minutes, the tornado warning was extended. Local emergency messages also warned of flash flooding. Several nearby roads had already become impassable. The store manager decided no one would be permitted to leave until authorities said it was safe. Most customers accepted that. They sat on the floor, leaned against walls, or called relatives. Employees passed out bottled water from damaged cases in the stockroom. I began counting everyone so we would know whether anyone went missing during the emergency. There were 31 customers and 19 employees. One of the customers stood apart from the others. He was an adult man wearing a reflective waterproof jacket, heavy work pants, and muddy boots. He carried a small black duffel bag. He told me he had been driving a delivery vehicle when the road flooded. According to him, he abandoned the vehicle and ran into the store shortly before we locked the doors. I asked whether he needed to contact his employer. He said his phone had stopped working after getting wet. I offered to let him use the store phone. He declined. He said there was no point until the storm passed. There was nothing obviously threatening about him, but he watched the employees more closely than the weather. While everyone else focused on the emergency alerts, he looked at doors, ceiling cameras, fire extinguishers, and the key ring attached to my belt. I noticed him staring at the emergency map mounted beside the training room. When he realized I was watching, he smiled. "Trying to figure out the safest exit," he said. I told him all public exits would remain locked until the warning ended. He looked toward the employee hallway. "What about those?" "Alarmed," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he asked which doors still worked if the backup power failed. I did not answer. Before I could question him further, an employee called me over because a customer was having difficulty breathing. The customer was an adult woman who appeared to be experiencing a panic attack. We moved her into the training room, found a chair, and helped her control her breathing. By the time she calmed down, the man with the duffel bag was no longer near the emergency map. I found him sitting with several customers along the hallway wall. He was speaking to an older employee from the hardware department. The employee was explaining how the emergency generator worked. I interrupted the conversation and asked the employee to help distribute water. The man watched him leave. "You take storms seriously here," he said. "We have to. You ever lose all the power?" "Not while I've been here." He looked up at one of the emergency lights. "There's always a first time." At 10:08, the tornado warning expired. The wind weakened, but the rain continued. We received a message from local authorities recommending that everyone remain indoors because of flooding and fallen power lines. The store manager contacted the company's emergency support line. We were told to shelter in place until conditions improved. Because the building was closed and the roads were unsafe, management decided to move everyone into the employee break room and nearby training room. Those areas had chairs, vending machines, restrooms, and fewer exposed shelves. Before moving the group, I conducted another count. There were still 50 people. The man in the reflective jacket was among them. We locked the public entrances and lowered the metal shutters over the pharmacy and electronics counters. 2 employees remained near the front to watch the doors. The security employee monitored the cameras. Everyone else was instructed to stay near the shelter area. For the first hour, nothing happened. Some customers tried to sleep. Others played games on their phones. Employees brought blankets from the bedding department and packaged snacks from grocery. The storm seemed to be moving away. Then the store radio on my belt made a clicking sound. A voice said, "Operations supervisor to receiving." The message was weak and distorted. I pressed the talk button and asked who was calling. There was no response. A few seconds later, the voice repeated the message, "Operations supervisor to receiving." I recognized it as the store manager's voice. I looked across the break room. The manager was standing near the vending machines, speaking to a customer. She was not holding a radio. I walked over and asked whether she had called me. She said she hadn't. The radio repeated the message a third time. The manager took the device from my hand. "Who is using this channel?" she asked. Silence. Then someone whispered, "Receiving." The security employee joined us. He checked his own radio and said the signal was coming through the internal channel used by store employees. Only company-issued radios were supposed to access it. However, the devices were not encrypted. Someone with the correct frequency could transmit using another radio. The manager ordered all employees to bring their radios to the training room. We counted them. 2 were missing. One belonged to a stockroom employee who said he had left it charging near the loading docks. The other belonged to a cleaning employee. She believed she had set it on a cart near the front restrooms. The security employee and I went to retrieve them. The manager told us to remain together. The sales floor was almost completely dark. Emergency lights created narrow pools of illumination along the main aisles, but the departments between them disappeared into shadow. The rain on the roof sounded distant now. As we crossed clothing, we heard a hanger scrape along a metal rack. We stopped. Nothing moved. The security employee shined his flashlight between the displays. Rows of shirts and jackets hung motionless. We continued to the front restrooms. The cleaning cart was parked against the wall. The radio was not on it. We checked the restroom entrances, service desk, and nearby registers. We did not find it. The security employee contacted the manager and reported that the device was missing. The manager ordered everyone to remain in the break room. We then walked through the stockroom toward receiving. The backup lights were farther apart there. Tall industrial shelves rose on both sides of us, filled with shrink-wrapped pallets. Our flashlights reflected from sheets of plastic. Near the loading docks, we found the stockroom employee's radio sitting in its charging cradle. It was turned off. That meant the voice had come from the missing cleaning radio or from an outside device. The security employee checked each loading door. All were closed. The emergency exits showed green status lights. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then we heard knocking. It came from one of the trailers attached to the loading docks. 3 slow impacts against the metal wall. We aimed our flashlights toward the dock doors. The knocking came again. The trailer was supposed to be empty. It had delivered furniture earlier that day and had been scheduled for removal the following morning. The security employee approached the trailer door and called out. No one answered. He used his radio to request the store manager and another employee. While we waited, the knocking continued. It was not loud. It sounded deliberate. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. When the manager arrived, we opened the dock door. The trailer's interior was dark. A portable metal ramp extended from the stockroom floor into it. The security employee entered first. I followed with a flashlight. The trailer appeared empty except for several pieces of cardboard and broken wooden pallets. Near the far wall, we found the missing cleaning radio. It was lying on the floor with the talk button held down by a strip of tape. A small electronic device sat beside it. The device was playing an audio recording. The recording contained the store manager's voice saying, "Operations supervisor to receiving." Someone had recorded her during a previous shift. The knocking came from another device taped beneath the trailer wall. It was a battery-powered motor, striking the metal at regular intervals. The trailer had been prepared before the storm. The security employee immediately ordered everyone out. We closed the trailer and called the police. The call connected, but emergency services said officers were responding to multiple weather incidents. Flooding prevented immediate access to the store. We were instructed to remain inside and secure the building. When we returned to the break room, I searched the man in the reflective jacket. He was gone. I asked the customers whether they had seen him leave. One said he had walked toward the restrooms several minutes earlier. Another thought he had entered the training room. We searched both areas. He was not there. The black duffel bag was also gone. The manager ordered another count. There were 49 people. Everyone except the man was accounted for. The front doors had not opened. The emergency exits had not triggered an alarm. The security cameras did not show him entering the sales floor. The camera covering the shelter hallway had stopped recording for 7 minutes. According to the system, it had lost connection at 11:24 and returned at 11:31. During that period, the man disappeared. The security employee reviewed earlier footage to see when he had entered the store. At 8:53, the camera showed the man walking through the main entrance. His reflective jacket was clean. His boots were not wet. He had not been running through heavy rain. He entered calmly, looked directly toward the security camera, and continued into the building. He had lied about abandoning a delivery vehicle. The manager asked whether the man could be an employee from another location. No one recognized him. We called the company's emergency support line again and reported a possible intruder. The operator instructed us to lock everyone inside the break room. That was impossible. The break room door did not lock from the inside, and the adjacent training room had 2 entrances. Instead, we moved everyone into the training room and blocked one door with tables. The security employee remained in the hallway. I stayed with him. The store manager joined us after giving instructions to the customers. We each carried a flashlight and a heavy metal flashlight from the emergency kit. The manager asked whether the intruder might have left through the loading trailer. The trailer's exterior doors could only be opened from outside. There was no sign anyone had entered or exited through it. The security employee believed the man was still inside the building. At 11:42, the overhead speakers activated. A loud chime echoed through the store. Then the man's voice said, "All employees report to their assigned emergency stations." The announcement sounded calm and official. Several customers inside the training room began speaking at once. The manager grabbed the wall phone and tried to disable the intercom. The phone was dead. The man continued. Department supervisors should separate from customers and inspect their areas. The security employee uses radio. This is not an authorized announcement. Everyone remain where you are. The overhead voice responded immediately. That is incorrect. The man could hear our radio transmissions. He might also have been watching us. We examined the hallway. A ceiling camera faced the training room entrance. The security employee contacted the security office and asked the worker there to rotate the camera away. No one answered. He repeated the request. Still nothing. The security office was located near the front of the store. The employee assigned there had remained at his station after the storm. He was no longer responding. The manager wanted to go to him. The security employee said it could be a trap. Then the overhead voice said, "Security is requesting assistance." The timing was too precise. The man knew what we were discussing. I looked at the camera. Above us, a tiny red light indicated it was still active. The security employee removed his jacket and threw it over the camera. The speaker immediately clicked off. That confirmed someone was watching from the security system. The intruder had access to the camera feeds and intercom. We decided to reach the security office using a route through the back corridor that was not covered by the main sales floor cameras. The store manager remained with the customers. The security employee and I entered the employee hallway and passed through the stockroom offices. Every door we reached was closed. The hallway lights dimmed as the emergency generator struggled. At one intersection, we found a portable camera mounted near the ceiling. It was not store equipment. A black cable ran from the camera into a maintenance closet. Inside the closet was a small laptop connected to several devices. The screen displayed camera feeds from around the building. The training room hallway appeared in one window. The loading docks appeared in another. A third showed the security office. The security employee was sitting in his chair with his hands behind his back. His head was lowered. He appeared conscious, but something covered his mouth. A man in dark clothing stood behind him. The reflective jacket had been removed. The black duffel bag was open on the desk. We could not see the man's face. He leaned toward the security employee and whispered something. Then he looked directly into the office camera. He raised one finger and pointed toward the maintenance closet. He knew we had found the laptop. The screen went black. A second later, the store lights failed completely. The emergency generator had been shut down. Our flashlights became the only source of light. The store alarms began producing intermittent beeps as their backup batteries activated. The security employee grabbed the laptop. We hurried toward the security office. The employee corridor led behind the customer service desk and opened near the front registers. As we approached the final door, we heard footsteps on the other side. They moved slowly across the tile, then stopped. The security employee whispered that we should wait. A radio clicked outside the door. The man said, "You left the customers alone." The voice came from only a few feet away. Neither of us responded. The radio clicked again. "You should go back." The doorknob moved. We stepped away from it. The door opened a few inches. The security employee shined his flashlight through the gap. No one was visible. The door opened farther. A store radio lay on the floor. The man's voice continued through it. "You should go back now." From somewhere deep in the building, a woman screamed. It came from the direction of the training room. We ran. We crossed the dark sales floor as quickly as we could. Shelves and displays passed through the beams of our flashlights. When we reached the training room, the hallway was empty. The jacket had been removed from the camera. The tables blocking the side entrance had been moved. Inside, customers and employees were crowded against the far wall. The store manager was gone. A customer told us the overhead speaker had announced that smoke had been detected near the training room. The manager opened the side door to check the hallway. The lights went out. Someone pulled her through the doorway. The customers heard a struggle, followed by the scream. By the time they found flashlights, both the manager and intruder had disappeared. The security employee became visibly frightened. The intruder was not trying to rob the store. He was targeting management and security. We still did not understand why. We gave the customers instructions to remain together and defend the doors with tables. 2 adult employees volunteered to stand near each entrance with fire extinguishers. The security employee and I checked the laptop taken from the maintenance closet. Its battery was still working. The camera feeds had disappeared, but several folders were visible. One folder contained employee photographs. Another contained emergency maps. A third was labeled with the date of the storm. Inside were copies of staff schedules, weather forecasts, floor plans, and handwritten notes. The man had been planning the incident for weeks. One document contained a list of names and job titles. The names of the store manager, the security employees, and several supervisors had been circled. My name was among them. Beside each name was a date. The dates went back almost 6 years. The security employee recognized the earliest one. It was a date of an accident that occurred before I began working at the store. An overnight maintenance contractor had fallen from a raised platform while repairing a sign near the ceiling. The contractor survived but suffered serious injuries. According to the security employee, an investigation concluded that he had ignored safety procedures and entered the lift without proper authorization. His contract was terminated. The man blamed store management. He claimed the lift had malfunctioned and that employees delayed calling emergency services because they were afraid of being punished for allowing him to work after hours. The store denied those accusations. The contractor filed a lawsuit, but it was dismissed. He continued sending letters to the company for several years. The security employee had never met him, but he remembered seeing a photograph attached to one of the reports. He opened the folder of employee images and found a photograph of the man in the reflective jacket. It was the injured contractor. The photograph had been taken recently. He looked older than the image in the old company file, but it was clearly the same person. The circled employees had all been connected to the accident or its investigation. The current store manager had been an assistant manager at the time. The security employee who was now restrained in the office had written the original incident report. My connection was less obvious. Then I found an old email in the folder. During my first year at the store, I had been asked to organize archived safety documents. I had scanned several boxes of paper reports into the company system. One of them concerned the contractor's accident. According to the intruder's notes, I had altered the record. I had not altered anything. I had simply scanned the document. But the man believed everyone whose name appeared in the digital file had participated in a cover-up. The final document in the folder was titled Emergency Review. It described the storm as a test. The man intended to recreate the conditions of his accident: loss of power, failed communication, management making decisions without knowing where employees were. The document ended with one sentence: they will decide who is worth finding. At that moment, the laptop emitted a tone. A live camera feed opened automatically. It showed the furniture department. The store manager was seated in a display chair. Her wrists were secured in front of her with plastic ties. She appeared frightened but unharmed. Behind her was a tall warehouse ladder. The man stood beside it holding a radio. He looked directly into the camera. "Operations supervisor," he said. "Come alone." The security employee shook his head. The man continued. "If anyone else enters the department, the lights stay off and the doors stay locked." He raised a remote control. "The generator can be restarted from where I am. The exit alarms can also be disabled. You need both before the water reaches the building." I looked toward the training room. The customers were becoming restless. Several phones had received flood warnings, stating that water was moving toward the commercial area. The store floor was slightly elevated, but no one knew how high the water would rise. We needed the emergency systems restored. The security employee said the man was lying. I suspected he was too. Still, the store manager was being held in the furniture department. Police had not arrived. We had no reliable way to contact him. I told the security employee to watch the laptop and guide me through the cameras if they returned. Then I entered the sales floor alone. The walk to furniture felt much longer than it normally did. The store was completely dark except for my flashlight and faint battery-powered exit signs. Water dripped somewhere near the ceiling. Wind pushed against the building. Every few seconds, a radio clicked from an unknown location. The man did not speak again. When I reached the furniture department, I saw the camera first. It was attached to a shelf facing a staged living room display. The manager sat in the chair. The man stood several feet behind her. The black duffel bag was on a display table. His reflective jacket had been folded beside it. I stopped at the edge of the department. The man instructed me to place my flashlight on the floor. I did. A battery lamp illuminated the area around him. He looked like an ordinary adult wearing work clothes. There was nothing wild or frantic in his expression. He appeared calm. That made him more frightening. He asked whether I knew who he was. I said I did. He asked what the company report said about his accident. I told him I had only scanned it. You signed a digital copy, he said. The system recorded my employee login. You certified it. I uploaded it. You made their version permanent. The store manager told him none of us had been involved in the original investigation. He tightened his grip on the remote. You were there, he said to her. She said she had been working in another department that night. He claimed she had seen him lying on the floor and walked away. The manager said she left to find help. You looked at me, he said. Then you checked the camera? She explained that she had been trying to determine whether anyone had witnessed the fall. He did not accept the explanation. He had spent years replaying the event until every action had become intentional in his mind. He ordered me to sit in another display chair. There were plastic ties waiting on the armrest. I did not move. He said the store would remain without power until I cooperated. I asked what he wanted us to do. He pointed toward the ladder. It had been positioned beneath a section of ceiling near the center of the department. At the top was a metal service platform used to reach lights and signs. He wanted the manager to climb. He said she would stand on the platform while I remained below. Then he would turn off the battery lamp. I would be given a choice. I could search for the emergency controls and leave her in darkness, or I could stay beside the ladder and wait for help. He wanted to prove that management would always choose the building over a person. I told him the comparison made no sense. He said it was exactly what happened to him. The manager had already been restrained. She could not safely climb. The man removed the plastic ties from her wrists. He ordered her toward the ladder. She stood slowly. I noticed movement in the darkness beyond the furniture displays. A tiny light flashed twice. It was a security employee. He had followed me. The man did not see him. I needed to keep the intruder focused on me. I asked why he had brought customers into the situation. He said the storm had brought them. I only needed witnesses. You could have killed someone in that trailer. The trailer was empty. You locked us inside. The roads are flooded. You have stayed anyway. He spoke as though every risk had been carefully controlled. I pointed out that he had assaulted the security employee and the manager. He said no one had been seriously injured. He seemed proud of that distinction. In his mind, he was conducting an investigation. He was not a criminal. He was forcing the store to admit what it had done. The manager reached the ladder. The man ordered her to climb. She placed one foot on the bottom step. The security employee moved closer behind the displays. The intruder noticed a reflection. He turned. I grabbed the metal floor lamp beside the display chair and swung it into his arm. The remote fell from his hand. The manager moved away from the ladder. The intruder rushed toward me. We struck the edge of a display table and fell against a sofa. He reached into his jacket. I believed he was reaching for a weapon. The security employee discharged a fire extinguisher from several feet away. A cloud of white powder covered the intruder's face and clothing. He stumbled backward, coughing and shielding his eyes. I kicked the remote beneath the sofa. The manager ran toward the main aisle. The security employee tackled the man against a mattress display. The intruder fought desperately but appeared weakened by an old injury. One of his legs did not bend normally. Together, we restrained him using the plastic ties he had prepared for us. We searched his jacket. He did not have a firearm. He carried a folding utility knife, several radios, copy keys, and a device connected to the store's emergency systems. The black duffel bag contained batteries, tape, portable cameras, tools, and printed copies of the old accident report. The remote control had been designed to interrupt the generator's control signal. The security employee found the reset instructions on the laptop. Within several minutes, emergency power returned. The lights came on across the main aisles. The exit alarms reactivated. The front cameras resumed recording. We freed the restrained security worker from the office. He was shaken but not seriously injured. The attacker had entered behind him during the camera failure and threatened him with a utility knife. He had forced the employee to provide access to the security system. Police arrived shortly after 1 a.m. They used a large emergency vehicle capable of passing through floodwater. The intruder was taken into custody. The customers and employees were interviewed inside the store until the roads reopened near sunrise. The water reached the edge of the parking lot, but did not enter the building. The company closed the store for several days. Technicians inspected the emergency system and discovered that the attacker had accessed the building on multiple occasions before the storm. He had entered while wearing different uniforms. Sometimes he posed as a delivery worker. Other times he wore a maintenance vest and carried equipment. He had installed cameras, hidden radios, and connected devices to the generator controls. The empty trailer had been prepared 2 days earlier. He had also placed a black duffel bag inside the store before arriving as a customer. The bag he carried through the entrance contained only wet clothing and a towel. He changed inside the employee restroom during the 7-minute camera interruption. Investigators searched his home. They found years of documents related to the store. There were photographs of managers, security workers, maintenance contractors, and employees who had handled records connected to his accident. Some photographs had been taken from public places. Others had been taken through windows or from inside vehicles. He had visited the store hundreds of times without being recognized. He kept notebooks documenting every emergency drill. He knew how long evacuations took. He knew which managers remained calm and which employees ignored instructions. He recorded the exact words used during training sessions. That was how he knew what announcements would sound legitimate. Investigators also found recordings from other big box stores. Several buildings used similar emergency procedures. The man had photographed loading docks, employee entrances, backup generators, and shelter areas. Police believed our store was the first place where he carried out the full plan. It may not have been the only one he intended to target. The criminal case took more than a year. The defense argued that the man had not intended to hurt anyone. They described the incident as an attempt to expose unsafe emergency procedures. The recordings and equipment told a different story. He had written several possible endings to the test. In one version, he would leave before police arrived. In another, he would remain hidden inside the store until normal operations resumed. A third version included instructions to take one of the supervisors out through the garden center during the flood. It did not explain what he planned to do afterward. My name appeared beside that version. The investigators believed he had selected me because I scanned the old accident report. The store manager appeared beside another version. The security employees appeared beside several more. He had not yet decided who would leave with him. That was what disturbed me most. Throughout the night, I thought he was following a fixed plan. In reality, he had been watching our reactions and deciding what to do next. The fake radio call to receiving had been a test. He wanted to see who would investigate. The missing cleaning radio had been left where he knew employees would search. The trailer noises were intended to separate management and security from the customers. The announcement about emergency stations was designed to see whether employees would obey a familiar voice without verifying it. When I covered the hallway camera, he added my name to the final version of his plan. I had proven that I noticed how he was watching. Just like that, I became more important to him. The company offered paid counseling and transfers. The store manager resigned several months later. The security employee moved to another location. I tried to continue working there. For a while, the building was safer than it had ever been. Every contractor had to show identification. Temporary badges expired automatically. Emergency equipment was checked every morning. Radios were stored in locked cabinets. The generator controls were moved into a secured room. But the changes did not make me feel better. I had spent years believing that knowing the store protected me. The attacker knew it better. He knew the blind spots, the forgotten hallways, and the weaknesses in systems we trusted. He did not break through a door. He entered while the store was open. Employees saw his reflective jacket and assumed he belonged there. He asked ordinary questions. People answered them. He watched our drills, copied our voices, and waited for a real emergency to make everyone easier to control. I transferred to a daytime position, but I still became anxious whenever the weather changed. If rain struck the roof too loudly, I remembered the dark stockroom. If the lights flickered, I watched the employee doors. If an unfamiliar contractor carried a black bag, I checked his badge more than once. 6 months after the storm, the store conducted another tornado drill. The announcement played over the speakers during a quiet afternoon. Employees directed customers toward the interior shelter areas. I was standing near furniture when the lights were temporarily dimmed to simulate a power failure. For several seconds, the department looked exactly as it had that night. The display chair, the warehouse ladder, the camera above the aisle. I left before the drill ended. That was my final shift. I found work in a smaller building with no public entrance and no overnight operations. I did not tell my new co-workers much about the store. The attacker was eventually convicted of several crimes and received a lengthy prison sentence. I followed the case until the sentencing. After that, I tried to stop thinking about him. Years passed. Then I received a large envelope at my home. There was no return address. Inside was a copy of the original accident report. It appeared identical to the document I had scanned at the store. Several sections had been highlighted. At the bottom was my old electronic certification. Someone had printed the date, time, and employee identification number used when the document entered the company system. A handwritten note had been added beneath it. It said, "You made it permanent." I immediately contacted the police. The attacker was still in prison. His mail was monitored. Investigators said the envelope had not been sent by him. There were no useful fingerprints. The postal markings showed that it had been mailed from a city hundreds of miles away. Police believed someone else had obtained copies of his files before his arrest. During the search of his home, investigators had found evidence that he communicated with several people online. They exchanged stories about workplace accidents, security failures, and companies they believed had mistreated them. Most of those people had never committed a crime, but police could not identify every account. I installed cameras around my home. Nothing else arrived for almost a year. Then, during another severe storm, the power went out. My home was dark for less than a minute before the electricity returned. When it did, the camera application on my phone sent an alert. One exterior camera had gone offline. It was a camera above my front door. I checked the live feeds from the other cameras. The yard was empty. The street was empty. No one stood near the house. I looked through the front window. Rain covered the glass. A reflective waterproof jacket was hanging from a handle of my front door. It moved slightly in the wind. A small black duffel bag sat beneath it. I called the police and remained inside. Officers arrived and searched the property. They found no one. The jacket had been purchased recently. The bag contained a battery-powered radio, a flashlight, a roll of tape, and a copy of the store's emergency map. There was also a small audio player. An officer pressed a button. The recording began with the sound of rain striking a metal roof. Then I heard the store manager's voice. Operations supervisor to receiving. The message repeated 3 times. After the third repetition, a different voice whispered, "There's always a first time.